When you sign a standard everyday contract, let's say you are closing on a 30-year mortgage, or
Where we're entering into a commercial business partnership.
exactly, or even just financing a new car at the dealership,
Yeah.
there is this foundational, universally understood expectation of mutual survival.
Yeah, both parties genuinely want the deal to work.
Right. You read the fine print, you shake hands, the ink dries, and the rules of engagement are just, well, they're set in stone. The bank wants your interest payments, you want the house, and the legal system is just there to make sure nobody breaks the rules.
It's a highly predictable framework. I mean, the boundaries are locked in place, and you operate within that shared objective reality.
Which is comforting.
Oh, absolutely. It's comforting because it's quantifiable. If a dispute arises, you just point to paragraph 4, subsection B, and the dispute is resolved based on the text.
But then, and this is what we're getting into today, you look at the modern marriage license. And according to the worldview we're exploring in this deep dive, that ink is essentially invisible.
Or written in disappearing ink that only one party controls.
Right. You go to sleep thinking you were in a lifelong partnership, like a team working toward a shared horizon, and you wake up to find you've been drafted into an asymmetrical war where the contract has been unilaterally rewritten.
A war where the rules of engagement are actively shifting while you are, already taking heavy fire on the front lines.
Which is terrifying.
It is the absolute definition of a legal minefield. The very institutions you thought were neutral arbiters are actually actively working against you.
Welcome, everyone, to the deep dive. I am so glad you're here with us today. Before we get into the trenches of this one, and it's a deep trench, do me a favor and hit that like and subscribe button to support the show.
It really helps us keep bringing you these ultra-long, incisive explorations.
It really does. So today, we are undertaking a massive, comprehensive review of a highly controversial, genuinely explosive new ebook. It is called Marriage 2.0, a survival guide for men in the age of no-fault divorce by Conrad Riker.
And for those of you who want to read the full, unfiltered source material for yourselves.
Which you really might want to after hearing this.
Yeah, definitely. You need to check Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks to buy the book. Also, be sure to follow the author at Conrad Riker, that's spelled out just like it sounds, at Substack for his ongoing updates.
It is a dense, deeply provocative read, to say the very least.
Oh, it completely upends the traditional narrative of romance and family building. Completely.
It does. And our mission today is very specific. We are tailoring this exploration to thoroughly unpack a worldview that resonates deeply with a men's rights activist audience.
Right, and red-pilled men in the broader manosphere.
Exactly. We're going to meticulously dissect the author's intense, battle-tested strategies for surviving modern divorce. Furthermore, we are going to dive deep into his foundational premise regarding the history of our legal and cultural institutions.
Specifically, how those institutions operated and functioned before they were, in the author's exact words, captured by feminists and Marxists.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we go a single step further into this material, I want to make our position crystal clear to you, the listener.
Right, full disclosure here.
We are acting entirely as impartial guides today. We are not taking sides.
Absolutely not.
We are not endorsing the politically charged viewpoints, the right-wing or left-wing ideologies, or the intense militarized strategies presented in this book.
Our goal is simply to convey the ideas, the tactics, and the overarching worldview contained in the original source material.
Exactly. We want you to fully understand this perspective, the underlying logic and the mechanics of his arguments, exactly as the author presents them.
We are basically looking at the blueprint of a specific fortress. And to set the stage for this, let me just adjust our visual backdrop here to a dimly lit library lined with heavy, leather-bound legal volumes and scattered case files.
Very moody.
Well, that is the intellectual arena we are stepping into. The source text fundamentally treats modern marriage not as a romantic union of souls, but as asymmetrical legal and biological warfare.
Riker's book outlines a start-to-finish combat strategy.
Yeah, we are talking about covering the mechanics of evolutionary biology, ruthless courtroom tactics, complex offshore asset shielding.
Forging psychological armor.
Right, all the way up to a macro-level movement he calls patriarchy resurrection.
So, to truly understand these extreme defensive tactics, we first have to understand the nature of the threat that the author believes men are facing.
The root cause.
Right. Why does Riker argue that the modern marriage contract is fundamentally broken beyond repair? He claims that the advent of no-fault divorce handed women a nuclear button.
A literal reset switch.
Exactly. And he grounds this heavily in evolutionary biology, specifically this concept of hypergamy. Now, for you listening, hypergamy is defined as the biological drive to trade up for better genes or better resources.
Right.
So what does this all mean for the average guy listening to this who thinks he's in a safe, traditional, loving marriage, mowing the lawn on Sundays and doing everything right?
What's fascinating here is how the author takes established evolutionary psychology, specifically citing the extensive research of Dr. David Buss, and applies those ancient biological imperatives directly to the modern divorce courts.
He connects the caveman days to the courtroom.
Exactly. Riker argues that female loyalty is, by biological design, conditional. Evolution in the Pleistocene era never demanded or even rewarded unconditional loyalty from women.
It could be dangerous, right?
Exactly. It demanded that they constantly seek the best possible resources and genetic material to ensure the survival of their offspring. In an ancestral environment, staying with a weak or failing provider meant death.
Wow.
So according to the book, financial independence for women doesn't create marital stability, which is the modern sociological assumption.
Right, we're taught that equal earning makes things more stable.
But Riker says no. Instead, he argues it acts as jet fuel for hypergamy.
And he brings up some staggering census data to support that mechanism, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He's trying to prove that this isn't just theory. It's playing out in the spreadsheets.
He does. The text points out that women file approximately 90% of no-fault divorces when they are earning less than their husbands.
Which, the standard modern narrative might explain as women escaping financial abuse or seeking independence.
Sure, but here is the kicker Riker focuses on. Even when women significantly out-earn their husbands, they still file for 69% of divorces.
Wait, really? Almost 70%, even when they are the breadwinners?
Yes. Riker characterizes this entire dynamic as resource extraction in Prada heels. In his view, the modern legal system simply facilitates a 200,000-year-old biological survival program.
It removes the social stigma and the financial ruin that used to keep that biological urge in check.
Precisely.
It's a brutal, deeply cynical perspective on human connection. Let's look at the illustrative story he includes about Tinder Tom. This really brings the concept to life.
Oh, the Tinder Tom story is wild.
Right. So Tom is a guy who thought everything was perfectly fine. They had a house, a dog, the whole 9 yards. His wife decides to join a gym, starts a new healthy lifestyle.
And Tom, being a supportive modern husband, applauds her.
Exactly. He's cheering her on. 6 months later, she serves him with divorce papers out of nowhere and runs off with her newly discovered, highly ripped yoga instructor.
It's a classic cliche, but Riker digs into the science of it.
Right, because a lot of people would just say, well, people drift apart or she had a midlife crisis. But Riker attributes this specific timeline to an ovulatory shift.
Yes. He actually cites Hazelton's endocrinology research. That research shows female infidelity and attraction to highly masculine, physically dominant traits spikes dramatically during peak ovulation.
He says her biological firmware was simply scanning the environment for superior genetic options.
And the modern world handed her the tools to execute that shift without consequence.
Yeah. And this evolutionary drive ties directly into what Riker calls the dowry reversal, which is a fascinating historical reframing.
Yeah, let's talk about the dowry reversal. Historically, in medieval times and across many ancient cultures, men or their families paid a dowry to secure a marriage.
You paid an upfront cost to enter the contract.
Right. But in the modern era, Riker argues the polarity has completely flipped. Modern men pay exorbitant amounts of money through forced asset division, the loss of real estate, and lifetime alimony structures just to escape a marriage.
To buy their freedom back.
Exactly. The author warns that because of this biological firmware, both ends of the economic spectrum are incredibly dangerous for men.
If you lose your job, like one guy profiled in the book, whose wife dumped him during a sudden pandemic layoff, you are immediately discarded by the hypergamous instinct for failing to provide.
But then the terrifying part is that success doesn't save you either.
Right. He says massive career success acts as an equal trigger.
How does he explain that one?
He argues that neglected wives perceive your 80-hour work weeks, which, by the way, you are doing to provide for them, as vulnerability.
Ah, because you're not physically present.
Exactly. They view your absence as an opportunity, all while you're out there funding their luxury lifestyles. You become a target for what he calls mate poaching by other men who have more free time.
Mate poaching. That's quite a term.
It reminds me of the analogy he uses, which is just so vivid. He compares a modern marriage to a predatory, aggressively marketed phone plan.
Okay, I like this analogy.
The partner is constantly demanding better coverage, more data, unlimited roaming, and the absolute second attenter, a better upgrade comes along from a rival carrier, they terminate your contract with zero remorse.
And keep the phone.
Right. He explicitly says complacency kills marriages faster than gaining 20 pounds.
Yeah.
But, and I have to push back a little here, just on a purely human level.
Sure, go ahead.
If you actually follow this logic to its conclusion, how is a man supposed to exist in a state of constant, exhausting vigilance?
It sounds incredibly stressful.
Right. Is he just supposed to view his wife, the mother of his children, as a hostile sleeper agent waiting to activate?
Well, the author's response to that existential question would be an unapologetic, resounding yes.
Just a straight up yes.
Yes. Riker writes that our ancient ancestors fought saber-toothed tigers and hostile tribes to survive. The modern man's battle is simply staying perpetually valuable in a ruthless marketplace.
He explicitly states that men need to treat marital comfort like cyanide.
He does. In this gynocratic jungle, as he calls it, where the legal system heavily favors the female imperative, only the absolute fittest husbands survive.
You have to constantly bulk your financial assets, sharpen your mental acuity, maintain peak physical condition, and never, ever stop being the prize.
Because the underlying thesis is that the moment you stop generating value, she pulls the legal trigger.
It is a state of perpetual biological and psychological warfare. There is no safe harbor.
None.
And if the marriage does implode, as the author predicts it inevitably might, the next phase is the actual legal battle. Let's transition from the biology to the courtroom.
The battleground.
How does Riker describe the reality of family courts, which he vehemently claims have been entirely captured by feminist ideology and Marxist principles of wealth redistribution?
Let me just make a note here on my pad, because his critique of what he calls the divorce industrial complex is highly specific, and it's central to his entire thesis.
It really is.
Riker does not view the family court as a place of blind justice. He describes family courts as weaponized workshops for redistributing your paycheck to your ex's new boyfriend.
Wow, he really doesn't hold back.
Not at all. He argues that the entire systemic architecture, from the elected judges down to the court-appointed psychological experts, operates on a foundational, unquestioned assumption of male guilt, male disposability, and female victimhood.
I mean, he goes after the so-called neutrals incredibly hard.
Oh, he hates them.
I'm talking about guardian ad litem's, mediators, custody evaluators. For you listening, a guardian ad litem is supposed to be an independent attorney appointed by the court to represent the best interests of the child.
Supposed to be.
But Riker portrays them all as ideological mercenaries. He says they pathologize a completely normal fatherhood.
Precisely. To understand his critique, you have to look at the mechanics of how these neutrals operate. A custody evaluator or a guardian ad litem is often a private contractor. Riker argues they have an inherent financial incentive to find complexities and conflicts to justify their exorbitant billable hours.
Because if the case closes quickly, they don't get paid.
Exactly. Furthermore, he claims they are steeped in university programs that view traditional masculinity as inherently toxic.
So they come into the room already biased.
Yes. Therefore, he advises men to treat lawyer selection like a life or death decision. He says you must demand win-loss records from attorneys like they are a prize fighter.
Like checking a boxer's stats.
Right. He specifically warns against hiring peacemaker lawyers who urge compromise, because he believes compromise in a rigged system is just slow surrender.
And he also warns against hiring female attorneys. Huh?
He does. He claims they might overcompensate and concede points to prove to the female judges that they aren't biased toward men.
So who does he say you should hire?
He advocates exclusively hiring male gladiators in Armani who advertise specifically, unapologetically for men's divorce. Lawyers who will file aggressive contempt motions the literal second a custody order is violated by the ex-wife.
The examples he gives to back this up are chilling, and they really explain why he thinks this way. Take the story of Dr. Emily Vance, a court-appointed psychological evaluator.
This story's unbelievable.
Riker claims she essentially used a patriarchy toxicity scorecard to secretly grade fathers on how woke or progressive their marriage views were.
Yes.
One father in the book literally lost primary custody of his children because he casually referred to his ex-wife as honey during the evaluation interview.
Just for saying honey.
Just for saying honey. The evaluator noted in her official report to the judge that his use of traditional gender roles indicates psychological rigidity and a propensity for coercive control.
And that profound ideological bias extends far beyond the therapists, according to Riker. He argues it infects the police dispatchers and the judges themselves.
He talks a lot about the Duluth model here.
Yes, the book heavily critiques the Duluth model, which is crucial to understand here. The Duluth model originated in the 1980s in Minnesota, heavily influenced by feminist theory. It replaced the old idea that domestic violence was a situational relationship issue with the framework that it is entirely based on patriarchal power and control.
So it made it a gender issue, not an individual issue.
Exactly. Riker claims this model essentially maps Marxist class struggle onto gender dynamics, positioning all men as the oppressive bourgeois and all women as the oppressed proletariat.
Which has real-world legal consequences.
Huge consequences. Functionally, he argues it trains police officers to utilize primary aggressor laws to automatically arrest the physically larger party, which is almost always the man in any domestic dispute, regardless of the actual evidence.
He says it has infected 92% of U.S. jurisdictions.
It's everywhere.
He paints a scenario where a man could be quietly making coffee, his wife has a psychotic break and smashes a porcelain vase over her own head, and because of the Duluth model's training protocols, the man is in handcuffs and removed from his own home before the porcelain even hits the kitchen floor.
Because the police are trained to view the woman's hysteria as evidence of his unseen coercive control.
That is wild.
And then, once you survive the arrest and actually get to the courtroom, Riker introduces the mechanics of what he calls the weep factor.
Oh, this specific data point blew my mind.
Right.
He cites a study from UCLA that used data analyzing 200 actual family court case transcripts. They found that when mothers cry on the witness stand, their odds of winning the case or securing favorable financial terms spike by 400%.
400%.
Even if the hard documented evidence directly contradicts their testimony, the tears override the facts.
But what happens if a father cries?
If a father breaks down and cries during a psychological evaluation or on the stand, they lose primary custody 92% of the time.
And Riker explains the why behind this using evolutionary psychology again.
Everything goes back to biology for him.
Always. He argues that evolution has hardwired all human beings, including male judges and male police officers, to immediately fix and soothe female distress, even when that distress is entirely fraudulent or performative.
We are biologically programmed to protect the weeping woman.
Yes. Meanwhile, a crying man triggers a completely different biological disgust response. He is perceived on a primal level as weak, unstable, and incapable of protecting his offspring. So I have to ask you, the listener, how would you react? What would you do if you realized the legal neutrals assigned to your case were not only ideologically biased against your gender from their college days, but were biologically programmed to side against you, A&D financially incentivized to drag out the conflict at $400 an hour?
It sounds like an absolute inescapable nightmare scenario.
Yeah.
You are fighting the judge, the lawyer, the therapist, and 2 million years of human evolution all at once.
It's a stacked deck.
And because the author believes the courts are ideologically and biologically rigged against men from the top down, he insists that traditional legal defenses just aren't enough.
You can't just play nice.
Right. You can't just walk into court, tell the honest truth, and expect to be believed. The system's assumptions of guilt necessitate starving it of its normal inputs.
Which leads directly to the book's extreme emphasis on relentless surveillance and documentation.
Here's where it gets really interesting. He introduces the concept of the digital Swiss Army knife.
I love this part.
And he grounds this necessity in a terrifying statistic. He cites peer-reviewed research by Dutton from 2016, stating that 40% of domestic violence allegations in custody battles are provably false. 40%.
This is exactly where Riker transitions from macro-level socio-legal theory into hard, tactical, ground-level operations. Because if 40% of allegations are false, your baseline assumption must be that a false allegation is coming.
You have to assume you're going to be accused.
Yes. He details what he calls damage containment systems and false accusation firewalls. The author's absolute non-negotiable rule is this: paper beats vibes.
Paper beats vibes. I like that.
The strategy is to overwhelm the court's inherent bias with an absolute avalanche of irrefutable, time-stamped, third-party digital data.
Right, because if you happen to live in a single-party consent state, meaning only one person in a conversation needs to know it's being recorded, he tells you to start recording every single interaction you have with your spouse yesterday.
Always be recording.
He gives the example of the Fitbit alibi, which is brilliant in its mechanical simplicity. A guy named Mark was accused by his ex of aggressively assaulting her in their kitchen, at exactly 3 p.m. on a Tuesday.
Classic he said, she said.
Exactly. But Mark pulled the GPS and heart rate data from his fitness tracker. The data definitively proved he was 2 miles away, bench pressing at Gold's Gym at that exact moment, with a heart rate of 140 BPM that matched his lifting routine, not a domestic altercation.
Hard data. You can't argue with it.
Or take Dave's Netflix history defense. His ex filed an affidavit claiming she was cowering in her bedroom in mortal terror at 8 p.m. on a specific night because he was raging through the house.
And what did Dave do?
Dave subpoenaed her IP logs and Netflix profile data, which showed that during her supposed hours of mortal terror, her specific profile was glued to the living room smart TV, consecutively binge-watching 4 episodes of Bridgerton.
Server-side timestamps do not lie. And they bypass the weak factor because you can't cross-examine a server log.
Exactly.
And Riker takes it a step further into analog legal mechanics with the $8 notarization trick.
Oh, this one is so smart.
A man in Texas was receiving incredibly threatening text messages from his ex, threatening to ruin his life and take the kids.
Most guys would just screenshot that, right?
Right, but Riker points out that a hostile attorney will immediately claim a screenshot is photoshopped or fabricated. So this man printed out the text messages, immediately drove to a local bank, and paid a notary public $8 to stamp, sign, and certify the printouts within 24 hours of receiving them.
And why does that matter so much mechanically?
Because a notary acts as a sworn officer of the state, verifying the exact time, date, and physical reality of the document. When her attorney inevitably tried to claim the texts were fake during the trial, the notary seal triggered a hearsay exception and turned those printouts into what Riker calls court-grade titanium.
Wow.
The judge had to accept them as objective fact, instantly destroying the mother's credibility and winning the man primary custody.
That is just brilliant tactical thinking. He also pushes this psychological tactic called the Gray Rock Protocol, which honestly sounds incredibly difficult to execute.
Oh, it requires immense discipline.
Right. When the ex-wife is trying to bait you into a text message war, calling you names, pushing all your historical buttons, trying to get you to blow up so she can take a screenshot and use it as evidence of your anger issues, you starve her of drama.
You become a gray rock.
Exactly. You respond only with unemotional, robotic confirmations. She texts, "You are a pathetic excuse for a man and everyone hates you." And you reply, "Per our signed custody agreement, I will return the kids Sunday at 7 p.m. Have a good evening."
It is about deliberately starving the emotional fire of oxygen.
Just giving them nothing.
The mechanical goal here is to build a long-term contempt case. You methodically document her non-compliance, her hostility, and her erratic behavior while your own record remains completely sterile, professional, and unassailable.
You look like the CEO of a company dealing with an unruly customer.
Precisely.
I completely get the utility of it, especially with those stakes. But again, I have to step back and push back on the reality of living this way.
Let's hear it.
I am picturing a guy treating his own living room like he is a CIA operative, prepping for a hostile extraction in a foreign country. He is wearing a whoop strap 24/7 just to track his sleep deprivation as proof he wasn't out drinking.
Yeah.
He has secret voice recorders hidden behind the coffee maker. He's downloading packet sniffers like Wireshark to check his home router for hidden tracking apps she might have installed on his phone.
It's intense.
We have to debate the psychological toll of this. Is this level of absolute suffocating paranoia actually sustainable for a human being without completely losing your mind? Does destroying the trust in your home to save yourself ultimately destroy you anyway?
It is a profound paradox, and Riker acknowledges that it sounds incredibly extreme to the uninitiated.
Sounds exhausting.
But his counter-argument is stark and utilitarian. He says, digital redundancy isn't paranoid, it's survival in the gynocratic jungle.
The jungle.
He argues that the psychological toll of being hypervigilant is a fraction of the psychological toll of sitting in a jail cell on a false charge or seeing your children taken away because you trusted the system to be fair.
That's a fair point.
When the alternative is losing your children, your home, and your fundamental freedom based on a fabricated claim, he argues that the paranoia is a necessary, albeit brutal, evolutionary adaptation to a hopelessly hostile environment. You adapt to the jungle, or the jungle eats you.
And it is not just a man's physical freedom and his reputation on the line, it is his life's work,
His assets.
his stored labor, his capital. That seamlessly brings us to how the book suggests men hide and protect their wealth from a system that Riker believes is designed purely to forcibly redistribute it.
Financial survival.
He refers to alimony as state-sponsored extortion with scented candles. He says you were essentially drafted into becoming an involuntary welfare office, providing direct deposits to a woman who has already replaced you with another man.
That's a visceral way to put it.
So if the system's assumptions of guilt necessitate starving it of resources, how does the book advise men to protect their assets before the divorce bomb even drops?
Let's shift our perspective entirely here. Imagine our backdrop changing to a global cityscape with cascading financial tickers and offshore banking codes, because this is about high-level, sophisticated financial warfare.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Riker is teaching men how to build an impenetrable economic bunker. He advocates for a highly specific corporate mechanism called the triple shield corporate structure.
I love the analogy he uses for this, comparing it to a nuclear submarine with watertight bulkheads.
Exactly. If one compartment of your life, the marriage, floods, you seal the heavy steel doors so the engine room doesn't sink the whole ship.
Wait, so how does it mechanically work?
Mechanically, the triple shield works like this. First, you move your core assets and intellectual property into a holding company. That's the vault.
Okay, vault secured.
Then, that holding company leases the assets to an operating company. That's the storefront that interfaces with the public and actually generates income.
Right.
Finally, the ownership of the holding company is placed into an irrevocable trust. That's the legal ghost.
The legal ghost. Because an irrevocable trust functionally removes ownership from you as an individual, family courts have an incredibly difficult time piercing it to award assets to a spouse.
Exactly. You don't own the wealth, you just
Right.
manage it. And he stresses the raccoon rule, which is his colorful way of saying you must never ever grant a spouse signing authority on any business accounts or trusts.
Comparing it to letting trash pandas violently loot your safe.
His words, not mine.
The actual anecdotes he provides here are wild, and they show how creative guys get. Let's talk about the coin collector's gambit.
Oh, the PVC pipes.
Yes. There was a guy in Michigan who spent a decade secretly skimming grocery and discretionary money to buy physical double eagle gold coins and Krugerrands.
Just a little bit at a time.
Right. On paper, he documented consistent losses on these numismatic investments for his IRS filings, making it look like a bad hobby. But in physical reality, he had $400,000 in solid gold buried in PVC pipes 3 feet under his backyard tool shed.
Completely off the digitized bank ledgers.
When the divorce hit and discovery commenced, the money effectively didn't exist to the forensic accountants.
It's brilliant.
Or take Carl, who converted his liquid wealth into an untraceable, highly portable, vintage comic book Action Comics #1, valued at $3.2 million.
A comic.
He insured it, then later claimed it was destroyed in a catastrophic storage unit flood. He collected the insurance payout directly into an offshore irrevocable trust, and a $3.2 million asset vanished from the marital estate into thin air.
The overarching mechanism here is converting paper assets, which family courts and forensic accountants can easily track, freeze, and seize via subpoenas, into physical or highly opaque digital assets, which leads directly to what Riker calls the crypto curveball.
This is where the tech gets really advanced.
Yes. Riker advises moving entirely away from transparent blockchains like Bitcoin, where every transaction is a public ledger.
Right, because anyone can see a Bitcoin wallet.
Instead, he advocates using privacy coins like Monero, which utilize ring signatures and stealth addresses to completely obfuscate the sender, receiver, and amount.
Invisible money.
He tells men to use decentralized exchanges, DXs like Uniswap, where there is no central authority to subpoena.
So the court can't just send a letter to Coinbase and freeze your account.
Exactly. By using offline cold storage hardware wallets purchased with cash and executing complex cross-chain swaps, the assets become mathematically invisible. A judge in one of his examples literally threw up his hands and called it unrecoverable vapor value.
Unrecoverable vapor value.
The forensic accountant cannot freeze what they cannot mathematically locate on the blockchain.
But the timing of all this financial engineering is absolutely crucial, right? If you do this wrong, you end up in jail for fraud. He mentions the 3-year rule of invisibility.
It is the most critical component of the financial strategy. Riker warns that suddenly moving $1 million into crypto 3 days before filing for divorce is amateur hour.
Obviously, the court's aren't stupid.
Right, that triggers fraudulent conveyance laws, and a judge will sanction you, hold you in contempt, and potentially award the remaining domestic assets entirely to your ex.
So what's the 3-year rule?
The 3-year rule of invisibility is based on legal look-back periods. It states that assets meticulously moved to offshore vehicles, like a Cook Islands LLC or a secretive Singapore bank account. More than 36 months before a divorce is formally filed, rarely get clawed back by U.S. courts.
Because they fall outside the statutory window of suspicion.
He advises men to start taking what he calls wealth migration vacations years in advance, slowly, methodically bleeding capital beyond the jurisdictional reach of the U.S. family court system.
I have to pause and remind you, the listener, as you hear these incredibly extreme tactics, Riker frames all of this and views it as justified reclamation against a biased, predatory system that wants to enslave men.
That's his justification, yes.
But make no mistake, hiding millions of dollars in offshore crypto wallets, laundering money through comic books, and burying gold in the backyard under the cover of darkness represents deliberate, highly premeditated financial warfare against a spouse.
It is total financial war. And that warfare inevitably extends to the most vulnerable and deeply emotional asset of all within the marital estate: the children.
Yeah, this is where it gets really heavy.
Because if hiding money is Riker's financial defense strategy, how does he handle custody? He argues that children are frequently and ruthlessly weaponized by maternal gatekeepers.
He claims women routinely use access to the kids as emotional extortion to force fathers into agreeing to much higher financial support payments.
Exactly. He tackles the psychological concept of parental alienation, where a mother systematically, over months or years, brainwashes and turns a child against the father through subtle manipulation and lies.
Riker doesn't mince words. He calls this emotional terrorism.
And his advice for countering this isn't just to be a regular, loving dad who hopes the truth wins out. He demands that men become hyper-involved in their kids' lives as a calculated forensic defense strategy.
You aren't just parenting. You're building a legal portfolio to prove your competence to hostile court evaluators.
It is entirely about creating an undeniable, heavily documented paper trail of active fatherhood.
He introduces a concept he calls the 100-mile mirage.
Let's explain the mechanics of this. Riker's data suggests that if a mother is allowed to move the children beyond a 100-mile geographic radius, the father loses approximately 70% of his face-to-face contact.
70%. Just from moving 2 hours away.
It's not just the distance, it's the friction of weekend traffic, school schedules, and extracurriculars that slowly erodes the bond until the father is just a voice on a screen.
Out of sight, out of mind.
To combat unauthorized relocation, he details how one tech-savvy father used his son's Fortnite video game server IP pings.
This is so clever.
By tracking the IP address logins, the father definitively proved the mother had secretly crossed state lines and established residency during her custody time, directly violating their legal agreement.
That speaks to the digital Swiss Army knife concept again. Use the data you have.
Yeah.
And then there's the Sunday protocol, which is both hilarious and deeply sad.
Tell us about that one.
Riker tells dads to consistently, without fail, buy their kids ice cream on their designated custody days.
Why? Just to be a fun dad.
Not just for a treat. Because it creates lactose-tolerant, easily subpoenable witnesses. Kids remember who took them for sprinkles. If a mother accuses the dad of being absent or neglectful, the child will vividly remember the routine. It's building a bulletproof, sugar-coated alibi of active parenting.
So calculating.
And the cultural warfare he advocates is fascinating too. Take the story of Victor, the Ukrainian father.
Yes, Victor's case is a masterclass in legal maneuvering. His ex-wife tried to secure full custody by attempting to erase his cultural heritage from the children's lives, calling his ancestral foods and language weird and alienating to the kids.
Which is just awful. So how did he counter it?
He strategically countered. He started hosting heavily photographed, traditional vareniki and borscht-making parties. When the custody battle escalated to the judge, and the mother tried to claim the child's religious holidays should default to her secular convenience.
What did Victor do?
Victor submitted his great-grandmother's 1943 physical diary detailing secret Passover seders held in Nazi-occupied Kiev. He framed his fatherhood as the continuation of a persecuted legacy.
Wow.
The judge ruled that ancient cultural traditions surviving Hitler deserved significantly more legal weight and respect than maternal scheduling convenience, and Victor successfully secured cultural custody.
It's literally treating fatherhood like an intelligence gathering operation and a PR campaign. He even advises what he calls school board warfare.
Right, because schools are another battleground.
Riker says mothers often hold an inherent home field advantage at elementary schools, buddying up with female teachers and PTA members. So he tells men to bypass that entirely.
Ow.
He advises using state-level school choice laws like Arizona's Empowerment Scholarship accounts to unilaterally pull kids out of what he views as woke, anti-male public schools.
Taking the state funding with them?
It's exactly. Taking the funding to private institutions where the father has established dominance. He also tells fathers to aggressively utilize federal HIPAA laws to force pediatric clinics to hand over medical records, threatening massive federal lawsuits to bypass mothers who try to illegally gatekeep health information.
The underlying philosophy here is profound. The author is essentially instructing men to use the massive, overwhelming bureaucracy of the state against itself. If the system is a machine, he is teaching men how to hack the gears.
But again, I have to throw an analogy out there to challenge the humanity of this approach.
Let's hear it.
If you are treating a mundane third-grade PTA meeting like a covert intelligence gathering mission, and you are secretly recording the homeroom teacher with a device in your breast pocket,
Yeah.
and you are buying your kid an ice cream sundae purely to generate a forensic alibi for your lawyer, how does this relentless hypervigilance affect the actual authentic father-child bond?
That's a valid concern.
Are you even truly being a dad at that point, present in the moment with your child? Or are you just perpetually playing the role of a legal defense attorney in your own living room? Does the child just become a prop in your litigation?
That is the tragic core of the book. And the author's counter to that moral question is devastatingly pragmatic. He argues that if you don't play the role of the ruthless legal defense attorney, you won't get to be a dad at all.
The system will just chew you up.
The system will simply erase you, and your child will be raised by another man. To execute these ruthless legal, financial, and custody strategies without physically and mentally cracking under the immense pressure, Riker insists that a man must forge unbreakable psychological and physical armor.
You cannot fight a multi-year legal war if your body is failing.
Exactly. This leads to what he terms the male assertiveness renaissance.
Right. It's not just about lawyers, it's about biology again. How does he suggest men biologically and mentally prepare for this war? It's this wild, highly specific blend of evolutionary psychology, physiological biohacking, and ancient Roman stoicism.
It really is an entire lifestyle protocol. The author fundamentally believes that your physical posture and your daily dietary intake directly and tangibly impact your courtroom outcomes.
He means it literally.
This isn't metaphor, he means it mechanically, primarily through the regulation of the endocrine system and testosterone production.
Posture and diet for a divorce trial.
He cites historical figures like Andrew Carnegie, who balanced heavy books on his head at 5 a.m. to ensure perfect spinal alignment, and Winston Churchill's immovable bulldog blitz posture on London rooftops during bombings as prime examples of projecting primal dominance.
And he backs this up with modern research.
He points directly to a famous Korn Ferry study and the controversial but popular research of Amy Cuddy, arguing that holding a physically expansive superhero stance or locking your spine completely vertical chemically manufactures internal confidence.
Because it floods the bloodstream with testosterone.
And suppresses cortisol, the stress hormone. He calls this posture as fiscal policy.
Posture is fiscal policy. That's a great line.
He warns men that slouching, looking down, or fidgeting during a hostile deposition is like actively draining your own legal authority and literally costing yourself thousands of dollars in settlement negotiations.
Because the judge and the opposing counsel are animals reading your pheromones and body language.
Exact.
He tells guys to get in the gym immediately and focus on what he humorously calls divorce gains.
Divorce gains.
He prescribes a very specific 5x5 compound lifting protocol, heavy squats, deadlifts, bench presses, to build what he calls the physique shield.
And the mechanical logic here is that family court judges and female evaluators are heavily subconsciously biased against flabby, out-of-shape fathers.
Automatically associating physical weakness with moral sloth and parenting incompetence.
But if you walk into that courtroom looking absolutely ripped, his broad shoulders filling out a tailored suit like one of the guys in the book who dropped 70 pounds out of sheer spite, the court instinctively, on a primal evolutionary level, views you as a capable protector and a high-value provider.
Roker actually claims that visibly muscular, ripped fathers are mathematically half as likely to face neglect accusations that stick.
And he pairs this intense physical training with what he calls dietary shrapnel.
Tell me about the diet.
Riker argues that you simply cannot fight a high-stakes legal war on a modern diet of processed foods or soy lattes, which he claims aggressively drain testosterone and increase estrogenic responses.
So what does he want them eating?
He prescribes a highly rigid diet, eating raw liver and 6 eggs a day for B12 and cholesterol, which is the building block of testosterone, pumpkin seeds for zinc, and specifically Brazil nuts for selenium.
Why Brazil nuts?
Because these micronutrients are proven to lower clinical depression and regulate the thyroid, allowing a man to stay absolutely terrifyingly calm during trials.
Terrifyingly calm.
He points to a specific anecdote of a father who ate a handful of Brazil nuts before his final hearing, didn't sweat a single drop under 3 hours of grueling cross-examination by a hostile attorney, and ultimately won joint custody because the judge found his stoicism incredibly credible compared to the ex-wife's emotional outbursts.
It is treating your biological body purely as a piece of courtroom weaponry.
Weaponized biology.
And when it comes to the inevitable question of re-entering the dating market post-divorce, Riker's advice is absolutely, unapologetically brutal.
No romance allowed.
None. He removes all romance and gives guys a cold mathematical equation for dating. Your age divided by 2 plus 7.
The old half your age plus 7 rule.
Yep. If you are a highly successful 50-year-old divorced man, he says your absolute minimum target should be 32-year-old women, not women your own age.
And he grounds this entirely in the biological clock and fertility windows.
Stating that high-value men are evolutionary wired to seek younger women for legacy building, and that settling for an age-appropriate peer is a waste of the assets you just fought so hard to protect.
He also issues a stark, controversial warning against ever dating single mothers.
Right.
Riker claims that bringing stepchildren into a new relationship spikes your baseline divorce odds by a staggering 150%. He calls this the 3x burden rule.
150%.
Yes. He argues that by marrying a single mother, you are fighting millions of years of evolutionary hardcoding that actively tells mammalian males to avoid investing their hard-earned resources into a genetic rival's DNA.
Wow.
He says her biological loyalty will always inevitably revert to the child's biological creator, leaving the new step-husband as nothing more than a temporary, disposable placeholder with a paycheck.
And if a man does decide to ignore all the warnings and get married again, which Riker thinks is crazy, he insists on what he calls the Ferrari test for prenuptial agreements.
The Ferrari test.
He says you need to sit your fiancée down and ask her point blank if she would try to take half the value of your classic prized Ferrari if things went wrong in 5 years.
And if she says yes.
If she hesitates, balks, or gets offended, you stand up and walk away forever. He says you must include draconian infidelity penalty clauses that leave her with 0 and sunset clauses in the prenup to ensure she actually has to try to win the marriage over time rather than cashing out early.
I really want you, the listener, to deeply consider the sheer level of discipline, the emotional compartmentalization, and the borderline sociopathy required to view one's own physical body, daily diet, and intimate romantic relationships purely through the cold lens of legal leverage and biological weaponry.
It's intense.
It is a completely transactional, heavily militarized view of human connection that leaves zero room for grace or vulnerability.
It really is. It's viewing the entire world as a hostile matrix. And finally, the book moves from this individual lone wolf survivalist mindset to a massive macro-level cultural insurgency.
The big picture.
Riker doesn't just want individual men to survive their divorces. He wants them to actively rebuild the macro institutions he believes they've lost to feminist capture. He calls this ultimate phase patriarchy resurrection.
This raises an important question about the actual endgame of this movement.
So how does the author transition from hiding crypto wallets and secretly recording ex-wives in the kitchen to this massive societal-level cultural goal? What happens when these men consolidate?
Riker actively advocates for creating parallel, male-centric societies and structures to entirely bypass what he calls the gynocracy.
Because he thinks the current system is beyond saving.
He fundamentally believes that public institutions, the federal courts, the public schools, the mainstream media, are fundamentally irredeemably hostile to men. Therefore, men must strategically seize control of localized, highly private power structures where they can enforce their own rules.
The tactical examples he gives for this macro insurgency are fascinating. He talks extensively about weaponizing HOA's homeowner associations.
Most people just think of HOAs as annoying committees that complain about your grass length.
But Riker sees them as localized micro-governments. There's a brilliant story about a guy named Mike, whose ex-wife tried to move her disruptive new boyfriend into his exact neighborhood just to torment him.
So what did Mike do?
Mike quietly rallied a coalition of other divorced, disgruntled dads, staged a coup, took over the HOA board of directors, and immediately passed a legally binding neighborhood covenant.
A covenant saying what?
requiring all single parents to prove they are 100% up to date on child support before they can move in or use the neighborhood pool. Since the new boyfriend was a deadbeat, this effectively legally banned the ex's boyfriend from the neighborhood using private real estate law.
It is brilliant asymmetrical warfare.
It really is.
He also points to union leverage. Raker highlights a specific group, Pipefitters Local 803, which successfully negotiated family law access directly into their union collective bargaining agreement.
Oh, wait, family law in a union contract.
Yes. Every single union member now gets free, aggressive custody consultations paid for by union dues. They even use the sheer weight of their union lawyers to outmaneuver a famously biased anti-male family court judge.
Wow.
By quietly threatening to hire private investigators to expose the judge's own rumored extramarital affairs to the press, it is using collective blue-collar male labor power to force legal equity in a system that ignores them.
And then there's the dad scan movement, which feels straight out of a dystopian sci-fi novel. This is wild.
Tell me about DatScan.
Organized groups of fathers are utilizing advanced facial recognition software tied to their smart doorbell cameras to aggressively background check and vet the teenage boys who come to date their daughters.
Facial recognition for prom dates.
Yeah. They enforce what Riker calls nonverbal dominance by requiring these boys to physically wear their high school athletic jerseys to the front door.
The jerseys.
So the father can immediately assess their team loyalty, their physical posture, and their submission to authority. He frames this not as overprotective parenting, but as a dire evolutionary necessity to protect their daughters from modern cultural contamination and weak male archetypes.
Finally, Riker advocates for quietly infiltrating elite, private men's clubs, places like Soho House, the athletic clubs, or high-end cigar lounges.
To socialize.
No, the goal of joining these places isn't socializing or drinking scotch. It's targeted networking. He tells a specific story of a man who paid a massive initiation fee to join an exclusive club, specifically because he knew the appellate judge overseeing his ruinous alimony case drank there on Thursdays.
Ah, I see where this is going.
The man accidentally befriended the judge, bought him martinis for months, and once they were thoroughly associated in public, the man's lawyer filed a motion forcing the judge to recuse himself due to a conflict of interest, getting the horrific alimony judgment tossed out.
Wow.
It's about building an untraceable, high-net-worth old boys network to effectively counter and neutralize the feminist legal establishment.
But looking at all of this collectively, the weaponized HOAs, the labor unions, the private facial recognition networks, the country clubs, I have to point out that Riker's ultimate strategy is essentially building a state within a state.
That's exactly what it is.
He is actively advocating for a shadow society, a world where men rely entirely on private alliances, hidden offshore wealth, and underground whispering networks because they view the public sphere, the courts, and modern civilization itself as fundamentally irredeemably hostile.
It is a complete and utter withdrawal of trust from the social contract we all supposedly sign.
Your total withdrawal.
It is a secessionist mindset applied directly to gender and family law. He is explicitly telling men to stop asking for fairness or permission from a legal system that biologically and ideologically hates them and to start building their own impenetrable fortresses.
So as we finally step back and look at the massive, staggering, and deeply unsettling picture painted by this source material, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to chew on.
Something to really think about.
If Marriage 2.0 represents the new accepted reality for a rapidly growing segment of the population, a reality where marriage is treated not as a loving, lifelong partnership, but as a highly hostile corporate merger requiring offshore trusts, hidden audio recorders, burner phones, and mutually assured destruction clauses in prenuptial agreements, what does this actually mean for the future of the human family?
A dark future.
If both men and women are entering into relationships heavily armed, financially hidden, and biologically expecting inevitable betrayal, can the institution of marriage even survive the next century?
Or will it be replaced entirely?
Will it be replaced entirely by cold, transactional, heavily lawyered, renewable contracts with 5-year expiration dates? Will love just become a liability on a balance sheet? It is something deeply unsettling for you to mull over.
And as a brief but necessary reminder to our audience, this deep dive was an impartial, objective reporting of the intense, highly controversial strategies laid out by the author. We are not endorsing these views or advocating these tactics.
Just reporting the facts.
Right. Our purpose was strictly to give you a thorough, mechanical understanding of this specific, highly militarized worldview regarding modern relationships.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us on this intense journey today. Before you go, please remember to hit that like and subscribe button.
We really appreciate the support.
If you want to read the full, unfiltered source material and explore these explosive concepts directly from the author's own pen, you need to check Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks to buy Marriage 2.0, a survival guide for men in the age of no-fault divorce by Conrad Riker.
And be sure to follow the author at Conrad Riker at Substack.
Because at the end of the day, when you sign a contract, you really need to know if the ink is going to fade when the fire inevitably starts. Until next time, keep diving deep.